Welcome to Newshour. The war in Gaza has now entered its 18th month. Vital supplies are dwindling, neighbourhoods lie in ruins, and Gaza's infrastructure is buckling under near continuous bombardment. Tragically, the humanitarian crisis just continues to get worse, drawing ever-growing concern from almost every corner of the international community. Well, since the collapse of a brief ceasefire on March the 18th, more than 1,000 Palestinians have been killed. Israel's military operation has expanded to include the construction of a corridor dubbed the Morag Route, designed to split the enclave and intensify pressure on Hamas. In areas like Khan Yunis, families already displaced multiple times say they will not flee again. Defense Minister Israel Katz has linked any resolution to the return of Israeli hostages and the dismantling of Hamas. His announcement of large-scale evacuations marks a new phase in the conflict. Well, as airstrikes intensify and evacuation orders spread, Palestinian civilians exist on their wits, trying to stay alive in what many describe as a war with no limits.
Israel plans to seize large parts of Gaza as part of a major expansion of military operations in the enclave it announced on Wednesday. The plans include large-scale evacuations of the population, according to Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz. In a statement, Katz said the operation would clear out militants and infrastructure and, quote, seize large areas that will be added to the security zones of the State of Israel. He urged Gazans to eliminate Hamas and return Israeli hostages as the only way to end the war. Displaced Palestinians in Khan Yunis reacted to the news with dismay and determination.
What more can he do to us? The only thing left is to drop a nuclear bomb on the Gaza Strip. There is no food or drink. There is shooting and death.
A senior Hamas official told Reuters Israeli hostages would only be released through negotiations, not via military pressure. The Israeli military has already issued evacuation warnings to Gazans living around the southern city of Rafah and towards the city of Khan Yunis.
It seems like Netanyahu will not stop his war on Gaza until we are displaced. But despite the extermination happening to us and the extreme anguish, as a citizen, I was displaced 8 times. With God's will, we will remain steadfast and resistant on our land, and we will not migrate.
Gaza's health ministry said 41 people were killed in Israeli strikes on Wednesday, including children killed at a UN clinic being used to house displaced people. Hundreds of Palestinians have been killed since the resumption of strikes last month, and Israel has also cut off aid, saying much of it was being taken by Hamas. Katz's statement did not make clear how much land Israel intended to seize, or whether the move represented a permanent annexation of the territory in one of the most crowded areas in the world. According to the Israeli rights group Guy Shone, Israel has already taken control of some 17% of the total area of Gaza as part of a buffer zone around the edges of the enclave. Israeli leaders have said they plan to facilitate voluntary departure of Palestinians after US President Trump called for it to be permanently evacuated and redeveloped. Israeli leaders have been encouraged by signs of recent protest in Gaza against Hamas, the militant group which has controlled the enclave since 2007. Israel invaded Gaza following the devastating attack on southern Israel by thousands of Hamas-led gunmen. The latest move appears at least partly aimed at increasing civilian pressure on Gaza's leaders.
Well, what does all this mean for Palestinians and the people of Gaza? Joining me to discuss this is Dimitri Diliani. He is a member of the Fatah Revolutionary Council and he's speaking to us from Jerusalem. Thank you very much, Dimitri, for joining us on Newshour.
Thanks for having me.
Israel says its latest operations are about establishing security zones. How do you interpret these actions in the context of mass civilian displacement across Gaza?
The state of Israel, after 18 months of ongoing genocide, has created the world's largest concentration camps in history in Gaza. And these so-called security zones are a farce, mainly to have more control, military control, over the Gaza Strip. The Israeli genocide in Gaza was never about hostages or exchanging hostages. It was never about Hamas, because nobody in the world can convince me that after 18 months of ongoing genocide in which Israel has slaughtered over 50,000 Palestinian people, and it claims that it has killed the majority of Hamas militants and has destroyed 80% of the Gaza civil infrastructures, including schools, hospitals, businesses, homes, that there is anything left for them to fight. This is a war. This is a genocide, not a war. This is a genocide aimed at ethnically cleansing the Gaza Strip. The current Israeli government derives its vision, political and military vision, from 3,000 and 4,000 year old text that has been developed through a combination of supremacist sentiments, dehumanization of the Palestinian people, and very strong violent terrorist tendencies that the Zionist movement has been known for throughout the years. And all of this is manifesting itself in the slaughtering of Gaza's children, as we see today. So it's all about domination and ethnic cleansing, and everything else is just an excuse. Because we can tell that Israel has agreed to a three-stage exchange of political prisoners between Hamas and Israel. Israel unilaterally decided at the end of the first stage, for its own political domestic reasons, to stop its adherence to the agreement and break off the agreement. So going and using the hostage exchange, so POW exchange, as an excuse to further its genocide and ethnic cleansing is just a lie, a blatant lie that actually insults the intelligence of the world that is listening to this nonsense that the state of Israel is marketing. But they have to do so because they have no other excuse to give to the world. And they know that they are guaranteed the support of the far right sentiment of the world, the authoritarianism and the militantism and the racist ideologues of the world are behind the state of Israel.
Dimitri, if I could just, sorry to interrupt, if I could just ask you, your views on Israel there are very clear. Can I just ask you about the international response, though, because I'd be really interested in your reaction to that. We have seen mounting casualties, including, as you say, children in these strikes on UN shelters in particular. Do you think the international response has been sufficient? And if not, why not?
The people's response around the world has been sufficient. And there has been changes in the ballot boxes in democracies where the issue of Gaza has been major. And we can all recall that the non-position of Kamala Harris has cost her the US presidency, among other things. But no one can realistically deny that the Israeli genocide in Gaza was a major reason for her loss. And we can go through the statistics of that if you wish. But the people's response around the world has been anti-genocide by nature. On the other hand, we have governments who have become complicit for their own domestic reasons, for some ideologies leaning back to decades ago, especially in Europe, that these governments continue to be complicit in the Israeli genocide in Gaza. And we can all name, for example, Hungary's government. Today, the Israeli fugitive premier is in Hungary, despite the ICC orders to have him arrested. We can all recall the standing ovation that he received in Congress, this very much corrupt Congress and bought Congress. So there are some politicians, and many politicians, as a matter of fact, in the West that sympathize with the state of Israel, that are complicit either by straightforward support or by being quiet about the war crimes in Gaza. But the overall popular reaction has been very positive and very supportive of the Palestinian cause, and so much anti the genocide and the slaughtering of the Palestinian children in Gaza.
And just in terms of putting the other side, if you like, the other point of view, Tel Aviv maintains that Hamas embeds itself within civilian areas. How do you respond to that claim? And what does it mean for the rules of engagement in such a densely populated area?
Well, let me tell you something. The Israeli Ministry of War in Tel Aviv is across the street from a mall. And in every hospital in the state of Israel, there is a military operating room in the basement. If Hamas wants to do the same, do you think it would be legitimate to bomb the mall next to the Ministry of War that is directly responsible for the genocide in Gaza, or bombing hospitals like Israel does, because we all know and see in pictures, and Israel admits that has military departments in all hospital basements? Of course not. The reason why not? Because only supremacist ideologues would see in Israelis more of human beings with more rights than the Palestinians. So if you have, I'll give you another example, just make it much clearer. If you have a criminal neighbor and that criminal neighbor holds a baby in their hand and you want to confront them, would you punch them through the baby, or you would take steps to avoid that? Well, Israel is punching through babies. As a matter of fact, Israel has slaughtered 18,000 babies. And what kind of organization that is, that a nuclear power, after 18 months of genocide and total destruction, using more bombs that has been used in World War II, in Düsseldorf and other places, what kind of power is that could not wipe out a military organization that is confined to such a small geographical area? In other words, this proves my point that genocide was never a byproduct of Israeli war in Gaza. Genocide is the purpose, genocide is the goal, and genocide is the way that Israel is conducting its ethnic cleansing against Palestinians.
Dimitri Diliani, thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Much appreciated. Dimitri Diliani joining us there from Jerusalem. Now, my next guest is Adam Belos, CEO of the Israeli Innovation Fund, joining us from Miami. Mr. Belos, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Newshour.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me about your view of Israel's current strategy in Gaza. I'd like to hear your opinion on it and whether you think it needs to change at all.
To be honest, I am very convinced that we could have done many things differently, as well as not used ground troops for a certain amount of time. We've put our own people at risk, which is one of the reasons why genocide is not occurring. I think it's very clear to say that that Israel has done pretty much everything they could to avoid civilian casualties, which is drawn out the war. I think it's very interesting what's going on right now in terms of taking more of the area of the Gaza Strip.
Give us the detail, give us the facts that you're frustrated that haven't been provided. What is it that's been lacking?
The previous analysis was not analysis. All it was a degradation of Israel, the Israeli people, and the war itself, given the fact that Islamic extremists have done nothing but put their own people in danger and in harm's way. If anybody is responsible for the deaths that have occurred in Gaza, both civilians and combatants, it is Hamas. A great example would just be the people that have been killed for protesting Hamas in the last 72 hours.
So let's talk about the word you just mentioned, genocide. It was a word that was used by the previous guests quite a lot. Presumably you believe that word was misused, was inappropriate. Tell us about your view on that. Don't let me put words into your mouth. Give us your view on what you've heard.
No, it's very clear that a genocide has not occurred given the lack of deaths over the last 500 plus days. Israel is a nuclear power. There is a real reality that if Israel wanted to use nuclear weapons, it probably could, but it wouldn't be what's best for the stability of the region. I think it's also very clear that given the fact that Israel, like I said before, is a nuclear power, there is no real ability to establish intent of targeting civilians and women and children based on how the war has been conducted since October 2023. I feel that the use of those types of words are not only inappropriate, but irresponsible. And if anything, there was an intent to kill, murder, and rape as many people as possible by Hamas and Gazan civilians on October 7th.
One of the points that was made by the previous guest and some opposition voices have put forward time and time again is that the right wing within the country is applying pressure to Mr. Netanyahu to continue this war longer than many would think is advisable. Give me the insight into what's going on within the government and whether you think those inferences have been exaggerated.
So obviously the inferences have been exaggerated. Anybody that's going to say the right wing of the government is forcing Netanyahu to continue the war is an outside observer. As you noticed, the gentleman before who was on constantly referred to the government being in Tel Aviv. The government sits in Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. Thus, it already kind of shows his analysis to be quite off or biased in whatever way. The entire country wants this war to be over from right to left. But the war has to be finished and won, and there has to be a complete victory. And that's something that's very clear and widespread amongst the Israeli people, minus maybe a few hundred protesters. I also think it was very ignorant of the gentleman to refer to the hostages as prisoners of war. The majority of these people that were taken hostage were not soldiers or soldiers that were in active duty. They were civilians. So the idea that the right wing is manipulating the situation in some way, shape, or form is a complete misconception of what is going on in the Israeli political system at this time.
Okay, Mr. Belos, we really appreciate your analysis and for giving us that insight and that detail into what's happening in Israel. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from Miami. Well, as the conflict in Gaza deepens, questions remain over how long this war will be sustained and at what cost. Both sides remain firmly entrenched while civilians continue to bear the brunt of the violence. The path to resolution appears as complex as ever. Well, that is all we have time for on this edition of Newshour. Please do stay with us on A News for more news and analysis. And from all of us here in Baku, thank you for watching.